Welcome to the Sacred Window podcast. I'm your host, Devlin Eck. Here at the Center for Sacred Window Studies, we explore and expand on conscious postpartum care. We navigate the overlap of caring for others and caring for ourselves. We honor the transitions, not only in giving birth, but in being alive. Welcome to the conversation.
And I will never be the same again.
Welcome to the Sacred Window podcast. I'm Christine, your host. I'm so happy to have my friend Kay'aleya Hunnybee here with me today. We are going to be talking about the lost art of restorative tonics. Kaya is a clinical herbalist and integrative health educator. She's devoted her work to menstrual, sexual, and hormonal health. Kaya has a master's of science degree in therapeutic herbalism. She has over 15 years of experience in holistic health with a history as a local community herbalist, a massage therapist, a doula, a student midwife, and yoga. Kaya is a podcast host. I was recently so lucky to be on Kaya's podcast, and she teaches through online courses. She supports individuals via consultations and caregiving. She resides in the Wabanaki lands of Mid-Coast Maine, and I had the blessing of meeting Kaya this past summer at our Sacred Window retreat, and she has really been bringing all of the wisdom of Ayurvedic postpartum care into her herbalism practice in Maine. And I'm so grateful to you for being here. Thank you, Kaya.
Oh, it's such a pleasure to be here, Christine. Thank you for inviting me onto the podcast.
Yeah, you're so welcome. And as I was saying a little bit earlier, I think that in our programs, we concentrate so heavily on the benefits of herbal medicine for, not even medicine. We talk about herbal support foods. It's like that ability to bring it in through food is really the most gentle, the most, um, I think, direct way to really create a strong foundation in whatever it is we're trying to rebalance. But we haven't really talked about that here on the podcast. And I'm so glad that we have the opportunity to do this today, particularly, I mean, the lost art of restorative tonics. There's so many things in this title that I love. I love thinking about plants as art and like knowing them and working with them as a form of art. Restorative to me is like everything I need in my life right now at this stage of my life. And tonics to me is like really kind of it is that herbal support food. We're drinking it. It's not like heavy, heavy, hardcore medicinal dosage of herbs. It is gentler. It's more integrative. It's helping to build, not even build, it's like helping to clear the way for the body to do exactly what it knows how to do.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess I just would love to open it up by asking you to speak about how did this all come about for you in terms of like bringing herbalism into your own life? Why restorative tonics? Tell me a little bit about what brought us to having this conversation today.
Yeah, thank you. It's interesting that you posed the question like that because my entry into herbal medicine initially, actually, now I have to update my bio because it's been almost 20 years. So that was a little bit of an old bio. So in 2005, I encountered herbal medicine for the first time on a plant walk, which was amazing and really opened it blew my mind actually that there were plants that were medicine that were along a trail that I was walking on and I had walked on probably 40 times. And then all of a sudden I learned, oh my gosh, these plants that are here are actually plants that can support me or support others to heal, right? Like that was just mind blowing in itself. But when I learned that, I initially immediately was like, I need to know more. And at that time, of course, internet was very different. It was not really searchable in the same way. So I was like, how do I learn this stuff? Like, where do I go for this? And I did have a woofing do you know WOOF, the Worldwide Organic? It's a volunteer organization to volunteer on organic farms. And so I
Yes,
had
I do
had one
know
of
about
their,
this.
yeah, one of their booklets because I had been doing that for years. That was kind of my lifestyle, was like nomadically hopping around to different farms and learning and just skill building and helping. And so I had one of those and I looked in and I was like, I wonder if there's any herbalists in here or people who are doing that. And I found a man in Western North Carolina. At the time I was in Oregon, so that was pretty far away. I didn't have a car, but I just thought, he's an herbalist. He's been apparently on his land for 30 years. He knows what he's talking about, and he was offering an apprenticeship. So I wrote him a letter in the mail and he wrote me back and he accepted me. And then I had to find my way across the country, which I interestingly did, and ended up there without a car at the end of a dirt road at this man named Joe Hollis's place called Mountain Garden Herbs. He had 3 acres in the mountains of Western North Carolina in Appalachia, and he was a man of the earth. He was an herbalist, an elder herbalist at the time, and still, maybe lived another 20 years, and he just passed last fall. So why I'm bringing this up as like, I mean, he was my entryway and he's an incredible, there's actually, if anybody is listening and they're interested in just learning from someone who has that kind of deep relationship with earth and plants and kind of is a plant whisperer, he has a YouTube channel, Mountain Gardens Herbs, and there's many different videos on there if you want to, even though he's no longer around in the physical form. There's a lot of his wisdom online, which I'm grateful for. At the time, of course, there was like no internet at his place and he lived off grid. So we were not on the internet at the time. But one of the reasons that I'm bringing him up is not only was he my entryway into herbalism, but when I first got there, he immediately started, he was already in his 60s, and he immediately started telling me about Chinese tonic herbs. So that was something that's like my intro. It's bizarre. It's not true for most people, but my introduction to herbal medicine was with a man who was already working with these longevity tonics, these restorative tonics for his body because he wanted to live as well as he could into his elder years. So one of his favorite herbs was Gynostemma, and he grew a lot of these herbs too. So he actually had, I think it was at the time, it was the most diverse Chinese medicinal garden east of the Mississippi. I'm not sure that it continued to be that, but it certainly was at that time. So really incredible grower of medicinal plants, maker of medicines. He knew tons. He was such a student of herbalism probably his whole life, and then so much of his knowledge came through embodied practice with it. So he had like an apothecary there where we were filling orders for the local acupuncturist. He was really into the Chinese medicine, a little bit into Ayurveda, but a lot of Chinese medicine. So really my introduction was through like, oh wow, there's these tonic plants. He would take Chavanprash every day. That was another thing that he was doing every day. It was just like a part of his health practice. He had herbs like jujubes and goji berries that were just like a part of what he was cooking with. So it was a lifestyle essentially that I was introduced to. And from there, I actually just thought that was kind of what herbalism was. Like I didn't know anything at the time, so I kind of thought that's what it was. So I actually just, I think it's been honestly a huge part of my path has just been learning how to work with herbs throughout our lives and support ourselves regardless of whether we're in a state of disease or not being healthy, and instead to just support ourselves like, you know when we're well, honestly, to help maintain and cultivate and support our resilience over time, right? So like I think about, it's interesting because I think about the sacred window. I mean, this is something that people on this podcast will be aware of. And that postpartum period, yes, there's so much upheaval and there's so much of like the vata going wild and like just being, really in need of these nourishing, whether it's herbs or practices. But actually, throughout our lives, we go through so many periods where we could really use that support, and I think it's easy to kind of overlook that, whether it's, I mean, for sure, perimenopause is a whole other time that I think this is like, wow, really we could be supporting ourselves, but it's like the elder years, it's a loss or grief that we go through, it's abortion, it's miscarriage, it's whatever we're journeying with, a sickness, it's recovering from an illness or chronic illness, or so I think of, there's just so many ways that we can work with these kinds of plants. And I guess that's kind of what draws me to this topic, is that I think this is like the accessible form of herbalism that isn't like I need to become a clinician to work with these herbs.
It's also just, like the fast pace of Western society and trying to, raise families or trying to like, be our best in the work that we want to do. We're very driven as a culture. And I think you can see with the amount of stress that people deal with and the anxiety and the depression that can come along with that overstress. To me, I love how you described it as a lifestyle of this teacher of yours. It was his lifestyle. And I think when we can have an entry point that's like really, smooth and easy. And we're going to talk about that here in this conversation of like, how can we enter into this in a way that doesn't feel like, oh my gosh, there's so much I don't know. But yeah, it feels to me like thinking about restorative practices and nutritive herbs and practices, to me, that feels like an all the time consideration to just balance out the regular pace of the life that we often find ourselves living, certainly when we're trying to care for other people. Um, And so yeah, this is so great. And I just, as you're talking, I'm picturing you on this herb farm on these 3 acres in North Carolina, and I love this image so much. So let's talk a little bit about like kind of go back to like what is like that one tonic that you learned early on that you kind of always want to go back to, and what does it do for you and how does it make you feel?
Okay, well, I that's an interesting. I mean, probably if I was gonna really speak to a thing that I have worked with since that time, probably Astragalus is probably an herb that I have consistently worked with since I first met him and learned about it. And it's interesting because a lot of people think of Astragalus as like an immune boosting herb, which it is and has that capacity for, but it is also essentially a resilience tonic that we can just be adding into our soups, our stews, our grains. It's supportive for lung health, it's supportive for heart health, it's supportive to reduce inflammation. It actually is potentially like a light adaptogen. So there's actually like a lot of different, I think a lot of us kind of pigeonhole an herb when we hear about it because we're like, oh, that's what it's for. But when you really start to learn about, especially these tonic herbs, they're herbs that are almost meant to be more food like. So, yeah, astragalus is one that I have worked with over the course of time. How has that been supportive for me? At times, I've used it more medicinally, more like at a level of like, oh, I need a lot of support from astragalus. And then there are times that it's just kind of occasionally in a super stew, right? Like, so definitely in the fall time, any of those transitional times. So, in that fall time, when we're transitioning into winter time, even still now, we're kind of like flopping back and forth, I feel like. So, it's a really amazing herbal root. I mean, if anybody, it's something that you can grow in many zones, actually, many gardening zones. So, I've grown astragalus. You can grow it in the Northeast if people are in the Northeast, but there's lots of places that you can grow it. It's a pretty easy plant to grow. It is like a perennial, and eventually you'll harvest the root, but you can get it online too. It's like easy to get online. And I like to use it either as I actually really just love using the cut root, the just like root that's kind of flat and almost looks like a tongue depressor. I actually like using those ones, partly because when you throw them into a super stew, you're you can kind of like pull it out and maybe chew on it if you want to, but you don't have to like eat the rough parts of it. But you can also use it as a powder. So you can use powder, you can use the dried root in that way. Sometimes I even just grab one and just chew it. Like I'll just like be walking around and chewing it. So there's so many ways to like be with plants that I think a lot of people don't think about either. They're like, oh, it has to be a tincture. Like I almost never I don't even think I have astragalus tincture. Like I only work with astragalus either in powder or food form in a way, or like that dry form. So, and I'm not really using it as a tea. I'm either chewing on it or I'm throwing it into my food, my broths, like it's such a good herb for that, to like add into a bone broth. People are making bone broths all the time. So it's just like throw a little astragalus in there. Also, this is not, well, I guess this is one that I've been using since Joe. since my time with Joe too, is jujubes. Yeah, jujubes are just like really deeply nourishing. They're nourishing to our blood. They're also just like supportive, sweet. They have that kind of like sweet, um, almost softening and moistening quality to them. They're just a really nutritive, wonderful little red date that you just throw into a super stew. It's a really nice addition to your broth too. So there's like a bunch of them that I kind of throw into my broths really regularly. But I would say, yeah, like the transitional seasons are definitely, I'm thinking about herbs like that, astragalus especially. And then if I have like more specific things going on, I did for a while have what seemed to be long COVID, and well, it was 18 months of really being quite debilitated. And astragalus was one of my, and I had some unexplained chest pain, and not just some, it was really intense, and it was like one of the harder parts of my life. So it was really intense. But one of the things that I learned about astragalus in that time while I was kind of researching and like had no idea about is that astragalus actually has an affinity for damage in the heart, which I had no idea about. And so I started working with astragalus more intensively and was taking, significant amounts of it every day. Um, Not sure 100% if it like was part of the heal. It was certainly part of my healing process. Was it the thing that reduced my pain? I don't know, but it was part of my healing process. So there's so many things I could say, I feel like, about it, but it is interesting because I think some people who get into herbal medicine, they start thinking, oh, it has to be in a tincture, it has to be a tea, or like that's what herbal medicine is. But in my mind, a lot of the medicine that's going to keep us well, that's going to really support us, especially from this restorative tonic lens, is going to be more like unseen.
Mm. Yeah, I love that. I feel like, well, first of all, I remember you speaking on this when I met you this summer, and I think I was really I'm really happy to hear you talk about using this tonic
Mm.
in that time that you were in. And I think that you bring up a really important piece of being able to find the way that that plant is working for you. Like it's not going to be the same for everybody. And you also brought up how, it's we kind of want to pinpoint to something and have like the exact reasoning and the exact answer and all these things, but that's not actually how healing and the body works. It is bringing it back to that art, that idea of it being an art form and finding the combination of things that do what we need it to do at any given time.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, and I love having it be a part of our everyday cooking and actually bringing up jujubes. That's something that I hadn't really played with before working with Ashley, our
Mm.
cooking for postpartum instructor, and our mutual connection. When Ashley was creating the recipes for the postpartum training, there was all these jujubes, and I was like, oh my gosh, and there was a whole bunch of them left over. So after we, finished our week of cooking, I could go home and I've been like using them, and it's a very traditional postpartum
Mhm.
tea
Mhm. Mhm.
from traditional Chinese medicine, which I love.
Mhm. Totally. Yeah, it's actually interesting that jujubes, just because we talked about Joe, I kind of want to share just in honor of him and also as like part of my story is that Joe didn't really have any money and I had no money at the time that I was there. I was like 23 or 24 and didn't have a car, and he was living off grid and wasn't well known in a lot of ways. So we were living with very little resources. And one of the things, I mean, he had me going out and just like eating wild greens from the land. He had me learning about wild foods and learning how to prepare them because we didn't have any vegetables. But he also was like, oh, well, we have herbs, right? And so I'm like looking through the herbs and I'm just like, what of these herbs has calories in them, to be able to eat? And that's how I found the chuchu beans because I was like, oh my gosh, these taste delicious. These are nutritive. These are like, and I could feel it in my body because I was actually in a fairly depleted state, partly because of the environment that I was in, which is it's just funny to think about that. But it was something that then he taught me, oh, you can throw these into your food. And yeah, he had rice and beans. So we were putting our jujubes into our rice, which was a useful thing.
It's sweet. It has the,
Mhm.
the sugary, but it's, the
Yeah.
dates are such a part of
Mhm.
Ayurvedic postpartum
Mhm. Mhm.
cuisine.
Yeah.
And yeah, oh my gosh, I love
Building,
that.
building sweet. Yeah, like it's a really wonder, and it's really blood building, like supportive for blood building, traditionally. Goji berries too. So nice. Nice
Yeah,
addition.
so you kind of introduced into the herbal practice, you were really kind of a whole book opened for you on Chinese tonic herbs. What else comes up for you when you think about Chinese tonic herbs? And what does that category even kind of mean? Is it really just like herbal preparations from the traditional Chinese medicine tradition?
Mhm. No, I think actually there's a book by Ron Teagarden. Let me just grab it because then it'll be like I can show it if this is YouTube, right? Um, okay, well, this is not exactly the one I wanted to show, but this is one by him, The Ancient Wisdom of the Chinese Tonic Herbs. So this
Right.
is one of his two books. He has an older one. This is a newer one. I kind of like the older one a little better, but regardless, this is the concept here. Um, they're not traditional. So traditional Chinese medicine is a whole, it's that's a whole thing unto itself. It's actually not like that long standing. A lot of there's a lot of herbal traditions that come more from like folk traditions in different parts of China or in Asia, right? So a lot of the Chinese tonic herbs are actually herbs that have been pulled more from those folk traditions. Some of the ones that would have just been used in villages to support people over time that were more regionally based. So that's where a lot of these come from. And they're just kind of those herbs that, yeah, they're part of the food. So most of them are coming from that lens. It's not, I don't even know if like acupuncturists who are trained in herbal medicine use the term Chinese tonic herbs. So like I'm not fully aware of that. I'm not trained in that, so that's not something I can speak to, but the people that I've learned from, Joe is a significant one of them, but then I actually studied with Candace Canton in Northern California, who is another herbalist who also is super into Chinese tonic herbs. So I actually was with her, and she was the kind of herbalist where you go and you learn from her, but you literally sit at her feet in her living room and she feeds you soup, and the soup is full of herbs. So it's these beautiful traditions. Like, this is the way that I think herbalism has always been, is just, we are with somebody, herbs are in food. It's not this separated clinic thing happening. Yes, I am a clinician, and yes, I do work sometimes specifically one-on-one with certain health conditions, but so much of the traditions that I think we've lost are these like in in the food, in the lifestyle, you know, in somebody's living room kind of feeling of herbal medicine. So Chinese tonic herbs are really, or there's actually really specific herbs that are considered Chinese tonic herbs, or at least that he kind of speaks to here, which are things like Gynostemma, cordyceps, American ginseng. So like the more nourishing, not the Panax ginseng, which is the red ginseng. Although it could be, if somebody's older, that could be considered that. So that's a little more stimulating, and it tends to be something that is used more in the elder years. But American ginseng is more of that neutral energy, really nourishing tonic. It is definitely endangered, so it's not like an ideal herb to be working with, but it's an incredible plant, actually. It's a really incredible plant. Reishi is another one. So some of them that you would think of, or that some people think of as adaptogens, could be considered Chinese tonic herbs. However, there's a lot of Chinese tonic herbs that are not adaptogens. They don't fall into the adaptogen category. So it's more just herbs that have they're like longevity tonics. I would say more than chi tonics, longevity tonics. That's the framework from the Chinese lens, and really just herbs that are going to support our vitality. Yeah. That's
Yeah,
essentially
I
the
love
concept.
that. I love that. So so thinking of, I have not worked with a lot of Chinese herbs other than when I was pregnant and I had an amazing friend who was an acupuncturist, and I was always really depleted in my blood,
Mhm.
my iron. I
Mhm.
was very
Mhm.
anemic. just seemed to like run in my family.
Mhm.
And so I don't even know what she put in it, but she created like a whole formula for me to mix with water. And it was actually really gross tasting. Like I didn't want to do it, but I did it because I had to do it. And it worked. It was fantastic. But when I think about a nutritive tonic that I want to start integrating, I'm a big tea person. Like I want to drink something warm. I want it to taste, I mean, reasonably yummy. Um,
Not like you want to vomit it out.
oh, I'd rather not. I'd rather not. So what would you recommend for me of
Yeah,
those?
so it's
Yeah,
interesting because if I'm thinking about the Chinese tonic herbs are so that's different. Like when I think about restorative tonics, that's a wider lens, right? So restorative tonics, I'm kind of like I'll include Western and Ayurvedic herbs because I'm also familiar with those. Not all Chinese herbs actually taste good. However, if you really wanted to go in that direction, Gynostemma is not a very, have you ever tried Gynostemma?
not.
Jiaogulan, Jiaogulan or Gynostemma is the name for it. Just basically a chi tonic herb. That was Joe's favorite. So I actually was introduced to Gynostemma immediately and he grew it and I was introduced to it immediately. And it's probably was his favorite herb for 30 years. And I bet he drank it every single day. And you know what? He died in his 80s, still active, still doing his plant thing, living off grid on his land. I mean, I don't remember exactly the reason he died, but he did well into his 80s. He wasn't sick. So I think that there is something, I mean, who knows, but there is something to be said for his lifestyle and the herbs that he was being supported by. So it's like slightly energizing. So it's not like caffeine, but it's like that deeper chi support. So Gynostemma tastes pretty good. You could add in, if you wanted to, you could do the jujubes or the goji berries. That I mean, I would probably just do Gynostemma and then like figure out some aromatics that you enjoy, right? So like if you enjoy like ginger or cinnamon, or in the winter, maybe you're doing more of those, or depending on the time of year, you could choose herbs that you like the taste of. But Gynostemma is a good one for tea, just like steeping. Mhm.
I love that. I love that. And I love like that's like fun to play and put extra little,
Oh yeah.
you know, your
I
faves.
think that's so important. Like I mean, I formulate a lot for people, and I think it's really important to consider taste preferences and to recognize like Chinese herbal medicine is, like you're saying, it's almost always disgusting tasting, like really quite gross. So that's like a really bad recipe for people actually doing the thing, you know? You have to
Yeah, it's a
really want
recipe
that.
to like go for the capsule, you know? You got to
Right.
get it down.
Yes, which is like for me when I'm using Chinese herbs, if I'm working clinically with somebody, I'm pretty much always doing them in tincture because it just makes it a lot easier. And I would never, whenever I'm formulating a tea, and I do formulate teas too, but whenever I'm formulating a tea, I think about the taste because I know for myself, I don't want to be gagging while I'm drinking a tea. So yeah, and I also think it's really important, like we can think about these herbs and then we think about, well, how are we going to take them and what tastes good to us? So like you can always add in your favorite. If you love Tulsi, add in some freaking Tulsi. Have Tulsi and Gynostemma and cinnamon or something, depending on what you want. It's really there's so much freedom with herbal medicine. It is not for the most part. I mean, yes, if you're using these stronger herbs that you have to be more specific about dosing. Yeah, but if you could be a little more like aware of it. But generally, when we're working with herbs, whether they're restorative tonic herbs, nourishing herbs, just herbs that are aromatic that taste pretty good, you can play around a lot with what you like.
What are the sort of go-to, in the category of Chinese tonic herbs that you recommend to people who are in the childbearing year that are safe for pregnancy and for lactation?
Mm. Well, that's a good question. I think astragalus is I'd have to look up. Honestly, I don't remember what is safe in each of these different things. I know astragalus is safe in nursing time. I believe it's also safe in pregnancy, but I could be wrong, so I don't know. For sure, the jujubes and the goji berries are really just generally safe herbs. Um, yeah, I don't know, like specifically around Chinese tonic herbs. If I'm thinking about restorative tonics, that widens it a little bit, but I don't know. I don't know if there's more. Let me just look in here and
Well,
see.
and I also think, on that, I think it's difficult to say that specifically because I remember in my Ayurvedic studies, I would, talk to different people who had different ideas about different herbs. So,
Yeah.
half of them would say, no, don't take triphala during pregnancy. You don't want anything that's getting things moving. And then,
Mhm.
the other half would be like, absolutely, it's safe during pregnancy. So,
Mhm.
I do acknowledge that that's a difficult like standpoint to take because it is not straight across the board one answer for everybody.
It's not. I think that is definitely a good point. It's also like when I think about pregnancy safety, because pregnancy is different. They put nursing, at least, you've got, you're sort of like, you could maybe err a little bit. I mean, you want to be cautious, obviously, but you can kind of be like, oh, that wasn't what I wanted to do, and you can shift it around. But like when you're pregnant, I mean, you really don't want to mess with things, ideally. But I always think about like risk versus benefit in pregnancy. So when I'm thinking about pregnancy safety, I'm thinking about like, what are our options? What are the options here? A person doesn't have to use herbs. If an herb has a potential for like a major risk, like there's no reason for them to use that. But if they're being prescribed a medication, or if they have some kind of condition that is actually pretty challenging or potentially has some kind of massive effect on babe or on themselves, then really looking to different herbal options feels more like a good idea to me. So for me, I think it's really interesting because yeah, I just with pregnancy safety with herbs, I have only a few herbs that I would like regularly use with people. And then it would be really case by case beyond that. So I'm like really particular around herbs. I know I've heard about, like, it's interesting. I've heard about, I wouldn't use ashwagandha in pregnancy, but I know that there are some people who say that that's a perfectly safe herb to use. There's like reasons I've just according to like my safety textbook, that it shows that this is a questionable herb to be using in pregnancy. So it just depends, right? It just depends on who you're talking to, but also like what somebody's risk tolerance is. Like, what do they feel comfortable with?
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think, it can't be stated enough that when we're talking about this sort of application of herbs, which is to be able to stay resilient and stay um, energized in the way that gives us the freedom to feel good while we're doing all the things we want to do in life. These are the whole point is to just nourish. It's not about treating. It's not about hardcore trying to correct an,
Mhm.
incorrect flow of anything. It is literally just like nourishing the tissues so that they can unfold and do their best work.
Mhm.
So I feel like when we're teaching about postpartum care, that's what we're talking about. We're just literally giving the person all of the support they need to let their body do its job because it's the body will heal when it's given the conditions to have the freedom to do that. So it's not about treatment. And so I think, as we're talking about all of these categories, it's really remembering that. And you've got rasayanas here as a
Mhm.
category, and
Mhm.
this is rejuvenation. Um, yeah, I remember attending years ago a National Ayurvedic Medical Association conference, and it was all about Rasayana.
Mhm.
Like
Mhm.
so many speakers came and lots of different subtopics, but ultimately it's about longevity. It's about giving to the body what it needs to keep putting out what we wish to put out in the world.
Mhm.
So this is like a nice little transition into talking about Ayurveda and the concept of Rasayana and the herbs. And you mentioned Chavanprash earlier, that this was, your teacher's one of his daily practices. And when I first started learning about Ayurveda, that was something I learned about early on was Chavanprash is this it's ultimately like a jam, like an herbal jam. And I always just took a little spoonful of it and ate it, but some people would mix it with like a milk tonic or in warm water. Some people would, spread it on something, but I just always loved a little bit on the spoon. but it's kind of a complex. I know I have friends who make it. I've never made it personally,
Mhm.
but yeah, talk about a little bit about Chavanprash and your experience with it, and then let's kind of look at some of these Ayurvedic Rasayana herbs.
Sure. Yeah. So it's interesting. Yeah. I guess I mentioned that, and it's interesting because that was one of the other things that we had, of course, with me not having a lot of food, having Chavanprash, there was like, oh my gosh, I'm eating this every day for sure. So between the jujube and the wild greens from the garden and the Chavanprash, the astragalus, chewing on the astragalus, I was well fed with herbs. But yeah, so it has like I think it has I actually I am not this is not like where I'm in my expertise is not in Ayurvedic herbal medicine. However, I think it has like 18 or up to 18 herbs in it. It is a very complex formula. And from my understanding, it is basically a Rasayana formula. So it is a formula that is like really supportive for digestive function and moistening and softening and convalescence and just all the supportive, like deeper tonic. It's like a deeper tonic that can be worked with every single day. So yeah, I have personally on and off in my life worked with Chavanprash just like on a regular basis, but I just don't always have it in the house and I don't make it. So it's not something that I'm like super, but I think one of the main ones that's in there though, I mean I know there's a lot, but amla, right, is like pretty noticeable in there. I feel like
Yeah,
amalaki.
it's that tartness. It's
Mhm.
the fruit that, gives it that kind of tartness. Yeah.
And I will say that one of the I've fallen in love with amla this year. Like I and partly it's interesting that I'm speaking to this, but partly because I'm actually well, I'm continuing my studies, which I always do, with someone named David Winston, who is have you heard of him?
Mm.
He is an integrative Western Chinese Ayurvedic herbal practitioner clinician who has been he's been working clinically with herbs since the 1970s, so a very long time, and really integrating with a lot of doctors and working on very complex cases. So he's an incredible person to learn from. I just feel like really grateful to be learning from him. But he loves amla, and I just was like, wow, amla, it's like wow, yeah, I mean, I like it, but I think about it as like having high vitamin C and supporting maybe our digestion and just like our skin or something. But I'm not, I wasn't thinking this is like the best plant. But I actually, amla is now in so many of my formulations, partly because it's such a restorative tonic. It's such a restorative tonic. It's actually so much more supportive for our connective tissue. I don't know that I totally realized that it was like so supportive for our connective tissue, for supporting even um just overall wellness and resilience in our lives. A restorative tonic for our digestion. It was just like it just feels like it ends up in so many. I mean, it is a little drying, right? So it has the astringency, so there's the drying quality to it. Um, but other than that, it's such a powerful plant that's just so building too. So yeah, amla's pretty amazing.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I love it. And I think when we think about Triphala, to bring Triphala up
Yeah,
again,
yeah,
that's
tripla.
sort of like
Hmm.
the the go-to Ayurvedic digestive
Hmm.
tonic. And would you consider Triphala to be part of that, like
Hmm.
Rasayana category?
Totally. Yeah, totally. I think for most people, I think the only thing is that it can be a little drying, so it depends on the person, maybe just whether they need it or not. But it could be a little too drying for some people. But yeah, generally I would say it is. I do include it in the Rasayana like kind of category for sure.
Triphala is the combination of three fruits. You have
Hmm.
amalaki, shiitake, and harataki. And amla, that's the same as amalaki, right? Aren't they the same or are they different?
Yes, amla and amlaki are the same.
Yeah, so it's just two ways of saying the same
Two ways
thing.
of saying
You've
it.
got,
Yeah.
yeah, so amalaki, and when we think about Ayurveda, for those of you who might be new to it, we sort of evaluate our constitution by these three doshas, and each of those fruits in the combination herb, which is called triphala, each of those herbs is kind of like this balm for each of the doshas. So whatever it is that your body, your digestive tract, your, tissues and body systems respond to, it's got something in that formula that it resonates with the most. And then the combination of them together just helps to create a smooth experience for our digestion, our elimination. And of course, the idea is that all dis-ease will begin in the gut with our digestion. So if we are first making sure that our tummies are happy, everything is flowing the way it needs to flow, like that is step one of rejuvenation. That's step
Totally.
one of all of it,
Totally. Hmm.
is just making sure we can process what we're taking in, making sure we're receiving what we need to be from from all those things.
Hmm. Yeah, it's interesting that you bring this up too. I was actually having a conversation this morning with someone who was talking, she's a nutritionist, and she was talking about just the importance of moistening our digestive tract too. So I'm thinking like if you were doing the triphala and you do tend to be more dry, like making sure that you're doing like chia seeds every day too to just help, ease the flow through the digestive tract. And she was just, I mean, you have to moisten those. You have to moisten the chia before you take them in. To get that really mucilaginous goo. But it is so healthy for our digestive tract. So it's like, yeah, there's so many things that are supportive for us. One of the things that I think about when I think about just in general, the lost art of restorative tonics is actually the lost art of softening and moistening. I feel like that's an area not that we're specifically talking about, but it's something that I think is really we live in a world where it's so go, go, go. Like our nervous systems are on high. I mean, most of us tend, if you're familiar with Ayurveda, to go out of balance in the Vata direction. It's like dry, airy, not grounded, all of those pieces. And rough, right? The roughness. And I think that there's such a tendency towards that most of us, not everybody, I mean, not everybody, but most of us could use a little more softening and a little more moistening in our lives. And so there's actually a lot of herbal allies and foods that can support us with that, right? So like chia seeds being one of those to like really bring the goo in. But in general, even like the phytoestrogenic herbs like red clover or like shatavari, like these are like just some of those herbs that are a little more moistening and softening. Even just adding ghee more into our lives is something that you can do for that. But it's like, I think the Solomon seal, or whether that's Chinese or marshmallow, like there's so much that we can do to support that quality. I, there is this way that supporting that's totally working in our gut. And I feel like it's almost like this feeling that I have of like, I can rest. Like there's a rest that happens with that softening and that moistening. Like I can be more receptive. I don't have to be so on guard. I can relax. And it's like my gut relaxing, but then it has a reflex effect almost into my whole being. Yeah.
I
I don't know
love
what.
that. And I think, it points to um like the opposite of dry and the Ayurvedic qualities is oily. Like,
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
of course, like the opposite of rough, smooth and soft. But that is such a good point. Like I don't always think about that, but in order for us to receive the benefits of any of these herbs, like if we're bringing it into a dry and depleted and rough system, it doesn't have the opportunity to integrate into the tissues at all.
mm-hmm,
So, I think about like some of the very first daily practices I had when I first learned about Ayurveda was just drinking hot water.
mm-hmm,
And like that's, when I came up here to get on the conversation with you, like I filled my cup with hot water because even just that, because I also think about like ease and like entry points for people who don't have, like I
mm-hmm,
definitely,
mm-hmm,
even in my love and interest of wellness and alternative medicine and herbs, like I'm still living in like, a pretty like Western routine. And so to be able to like bring in an herbal routine, whatever routine it was, it needed to come from a place that was already like going to seamlessly come into the routines that I already had, which weren't necessarily chia seeds at the time.
mm-hmm,
It was like, okay, like I can do hot water, I can get used to that routine.
mm-hmm,
Um, but yeah, so like thinking about all the ways that we're bringing in softening and moistening, and that's
mm-hmm,
something that just the intention of saying, okay, like have I had enough water? Have I, is my skin like all dry? Like, where do I need to put the oil on my body? It's not even just putting it
Mhm.
in. I just thought about when we were talking about ashwagandha, like that's something that I always put in the massage oil that I would
Mm,
use postpartum is like bringing
mm,
herbs also in from the outside on our skin.
mhm, mhm.
So yeah, moistening, softening, that's huge. I'm so glad you brought that up.
Yeah, I think I really think it's overlooked a lot of the time, and it is often maybe one of the first steps that we need to be taking. And I agree, like with the, it's such a beautiful wisdom, just Abhyanga in general, and just actually working to bring more of that moistening to our bodies externally, internally. You can bring the herbs in oils if you, especially if you're not making them, you can buy them, and just have them for yourself. Like whatever is easy. Like one of my favorite questions is how can this be easy? Because we're not going to do it if it's hard. We're not going to do it if it tastes bad. We're not going to do it if it's hard. So like, yeah, water, but maybe even water with a little bit of salt in it because that can actually help to, especially if we're dry, right? To help us moisten a little bit more. That's easy. We all have water and salt. Maybe it's a tea that you actually like the taste of already that actually is supportive for you. Like, I don't know, some people like licorice, the Egyptian licorice you can get, the yogi tea, Egyptian licorice. That is a very moistening tea, right? So like that's an option. If somebody just wants to get a tea bag and make some tea, just having tea as a part of your life, like and licorice in itself is actually quite a deeply nutritive. It's not certainly something to be aware of if you have high blood pressure or if you have any concern about your blood pressure to just avoid that. But otherwise, it can be an incredibly nourishing, really supportive plant for us. And it's a really simple thing. And it for some people don't like it, but most people do kind of like it. So it's a nice, easy thing to bring in. And another thing I wanted to mention, just like before we kind of move in a different direction, is that there's herbs like nourishing herbs from the Western tradition, like nettles, red clover, oat straw. Oat straw is kind of moistening, oat straw, alfalfa, those kinds of herbs that are herbs that you can just, you could grow those easily, or maybe you have them outside of your house, so you can harvest them when they're in season. And then you can just make these deeply nourishing teas with them, and you can, like what I do is nourishing infusions. And so you could actually, you don't have to make it complex, but whether it's like oat straw itself or oat straw and nettles is a really nice combination, or throw some red clover in there if you want to. And just take a handful of those herbs. It is a lot of herb, but like handful of those herbs, throw it into a quart jar, pour hot water over it and cover that for at least 4 hours. Let it steep up to 8 or overnight. And then you strain it and you can drink that throughout your day. And that can be, for some people, it is a nice, easy first step into just nourishing tonics. It doesn't have to be that you go out there and you go have to buy astragalus and jujubes and goji berries and gynostemma and all of these things, but it could be something that you just actually have outside of your house that you just learn, oh, this is a deeply nutritive plant and I can form a relationship with just this one plant. Like that can be the beginning. And I think for a lot of people, it is the beginning. And most people don't enter into herbalism meeting some, elder herbalist who has been doing this for 30 years and who just has like this practice with herbalism. It's often more, what plant do I feel drawn to and how can I incorporate that into my life? So just
I
want to
love
encourage.
that. And also, like, what do I have that's outside that's
Yes,
growing?
yes, exactly.
I
Yes.
love so much.
Already
Yeah,
growing.
this summer I have like a ton of lemon balm in this, the
Mm.
last kind of tonic or like category I want to talk before we might have to do a part two because there's so much to say, but is Nervine tonics and
Mm.
how to like bring in just like, my relax and restore my brain and my nervous system so that I can be a great parent. I can be a great partner. I can be a great, do and feel like steady and clear in what it is that I'm trying to do each day. And for me, the Nervine tonic is so important. And I am really drawn to lemon balm for that. And catnip I have in the garden too. So
Mm.
those, like I literally would do exactly what you said. I just like grab a bunch of them, like rinse them off and put them in the jar and fill it with hot water or just water and like let it
Mhm,
sit for
mhm,
a long
mhm.
time. But yeah, what are your favorite Nervine
Yeah,
tonics?
I love
Many.
Yeah, I love Nervines. Let's see, what can I say about this? So there's different kinds of nervine. I say nervine, but people say it both ways. So there's different kinds of nervines. There's relaxing nervines, there's sedative nervines, there's nervine trope or restoratives, meaning they're restoring the nervous system. There's stimulating nervines. So nervine just means it's working on the nervous system. So that's like a whole thing unto itself. This could be an entire conversation. However, however, I want to speak to um one Nervine Trover Restorative, which is Milky Oats. And I want to speak to that because it is something that is sometimes actually misunderstood in the world of how to work with it, and because it's an incredibly supportive plant. So Milky Oats is actually just like the tops, it's the Milky Oat tops, and it's when they are actually, you like, if you're growing them in the garden or if you find them, they're actually, you squeeze them and there's this like little milk almost that comes out of it. So it's actually the juicy part, the juicy time. It's before, they're the same plant that you would get your dried oats that you make for breakfast cereal in, or you make cookies out of. It's the same plant, but it's when it's still in its green state. And so you take that and then you have to fresh tincture it. That's the only way to get like the really deeply nutritive, nervine, tropher restorative action out of it. So you really do need that fresh tincture to get that out of it. Um, and you have to use that. Like it's really great for people who are like super burnt out or who have really just kind of depleted themselves over time. And then you have to work with it for like 6 to 12 months regularly to really get that like the restorative action from it. So, however, so that's I just want to speak to that as like an incredible plant for that can be really helpful in the postpartum period or after or even like as you're transition if you've been nursing for a really long time, you get really like you're just it's been years and you just feel depleted and you just kind of want to feel your body and your being again. You want to feel that like restored quality. That's the kind of thing you can be working with for like 6 to 12 months to really restore. So really great for that. Um, and you can also work, it's an interesting thing because you can also work with the oat straw in like a nourishing infusion. And that's just this sweet, it does have a lot of magnesium. It's super rich in magnesium. So it's also calming. It actually is calming and it's soothing, but it's not restorative in the same way. So I'm just going to put that out there because there's a little
That's so
misunderstanding
interesting.
around
But
that.
I'm
Yeah.
curious about, with the milky oat tops specifically,
Yes.
we're not growing the plant itself and we
Yeah.
can't cut them at the
Mhm.
exact time.
Mhm.
How can we source them while they still have that vital milk in them?
Yeah, you pretty much just have to buy the tincture. So you're gonna have to get the tincture fresh, make sure it's a fresh tincture. I mean, Herb Farm sells it, like a lot of places sell it. A lot of people, Avena Botanicals, Herb Farm, they all do fresh milky oat tincture. So people who know how to make it, I'm sure your local herbalists, there's probably plenty of people, certainly in Western Massachusetts, who are growing and harvesting it and making good medicine, but you just got to make sure. And it's actually not that hard to grow enough for a tincture for yourself if you wanted to. So you just need a tiny little patch because it's actually, you can make a decent tincture is interesting versus tea because you don't actually need as much plant to make tincture as you do if you were going to be drinking the tea of it. You need a lot more bulk out of it. So yeah. And it's also a cover crop. There's a lot of reasons I love Milky Oats. I actually have a whole podcast episode on Milky Oats. So that's one that people
That's
can go
amazing. Yeah, I am
to.
going to ask you for that link. And then when people look at the show notes to this, they can be like, oh, I'm going to keep going on milky oats.
But I would say, like, in terms of other nervines that I love, I mean, I love Tulsi, and I think of Tulsi, I know Tulsi is like an adaptogen, but is also a nervine. It's an anxiolytic nervine, also uplifting. I mean, it's supportive in general. I think that's probably the herb that I have in tea most often in my life. So I would say very, very, very regular. I also love lavender. I don't know, not everybody loves the taste of lavender, but I actually love the taste of lavender. I love growing lavender. I love having lavender around. I love the smell of lavender. There's just like this really beautiful, both similar to Tulsi and being both anxiolytic, meaning reducing anxiety, right? Like reducing that kind of overstimulation and uplifting. I love the combination of those. I love like having and also calming, right? Like supportive and also supportive for calming our digestion too. So like all of yeah, I love pretty much I love so many plants. It's hard for me to choose particular plants to speak about, but right now those are the ones that are coming out.
Well, I think the beautiful thing about it is it's what are we responding to? You know, think of lavender, I might first think of it as like how I smell it, you know, what does it
Hmm.
smell like to me?
Hmm.
But then, you know, there's so many ways that herbs work with multiple body systems,
Hmm.
which is just so beautiful. So when we find
Hmm.
the few that we really love,
Hmm.
chances are together they're going to really support a number of body systems for us, which is so great.
Totally. Yep. Yeah, I mean, I also like, I guess if I'm going to talk about a relaxing nervine that I'm pretty obsessed with, Motherwort is one that I really love in tincture form specifically. But yeah, is one of my absolute favorite plants that I can't. I used to not even be able to, I when I lived in Northern California, I actually was much more I went towards anxiety. I just went more into the Vata sort of picture more in Northern California, which I believe was environmental. Now that I think about it, it was like drier there, it was hotter, it was just like I went out of balance more often there. So I did not leave my house without motherwort tincture in my bag when I was there. Just to like go into the co-op. I would just take a couple droppers full just to like get out and go. And it's just like one of those plants that can be really supportive in that way. And is also really it's cooling, it was super hot there. It was like just a wonderful plant for so many reasons that can be an incredible ally. So I'll leave it at that, I think.
Oh, I love that. Well, Kaya, I am absolutely interested in having you come back and speak more on you have such a wealth of knowledge, and there's a lot here that I would love to unpack and go further into. Both in our programs, I'd love to have you come and do some work with our students, but also, yeah, I just love talking to you about all of this. I can see your love and your excitement and your experience like oozing out of you on all of these. Um, but I would say for those of you who are listening that are brand new to working with some of these, think of it as a curiosity space, as an artistic space, as an opportunity to learn about your own body through playfulness with these plant allies. And, you know, we've mentioned some really great ones to start with from several different traditions. But you know, there are incredible teachers out there that can help us in guiding the way and how to find an entry point that feels good if we need that. Kay'aleya's website is herbalwomb.com. I'll make sure that everything you need to continue to follow her and learn from her is in the notes for this show. But Kaya, I can't wait to work with you again very soon, hopefully. And I'm so grateful to you for sharing with us today.
Oh, you're so welcome. Thank you so much for having me. It's been such an honor and a pleasure, really, to talk about plants. I can't talk about plants enough. So,
Yeah, yeah. And I guess you know, just to end it, like
yeah.
what is your herb that is happening for you today? What is your herbal ally today?
I mean, I've got Tulsi and licorice in my cup, so the two of them are definitely allies for me today. Yeah, they're my favorites right now. But I
Beautiful.
do want to say, just to complete it, I do want to really encourage people that yes, like there's online learning, and if you're new to herbs, I really do encourage at least going on a plant walk with someone locally so that you can meet the plants yourself. Because as wonderful as it is, I mean, and I encourage people, if you want to learn with me, come join me, listen to the podcast. Those are wonderful ways to do it. But I really believe that the way that we cultivate relationships with plants is by actually meeting them in person and sitting with them and getting to know them.
I love that. I love that. It creates an aliveness and a connection with where we live in a way that is just enhanced.
Mhm. So much.
And then we see them wherever we go. We're like, oh my gosh,
I know they're friends.
oh my gosh, there it is.
We have friends everywhere.
I love it. Thank you so much again. And we'll see you next time.
Sounds good. All right.
Shanti, Shanti.
The Sacred Window podcast is brought to you by the Center for Sacred Window Studies. You can visit us to find out more about our online training and mentoring programs, plus resources and products for and about the sacred postpartum window at www.sacredwindowstudies.com. And our music is written and performed by Sarah Emmett. You can hear more of Sarah's music by visiting www.sarahemmett.bandcamp.com.